Welcome to Wisdom Trek with Gramps. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, and we are on day 2680 of our trek. The purpose of Wisdom Trek is to create a legacy of wisdom, to seek out discernment and insights, and to boldly grow if you have chosen to grow before. In today's Wisdom Nugget, it's titled Remembering God's Wonders, Recalling Our Failures, a trek through Psalm 78, verses 9 through 16. Today we continue our crucial and comprehensive trek through Psalm 78 in the New Living Translation, and today we're going to cover verses 9 through 16. In our last conversation, we opened Psalm 78, a powerful didactic psalm by Asaph. We heard his solemn call for God's people to listen to his teaching and his parables, profound truths from their collective past. The purpose was clear: to ensure that the next generation would not hide these truths from our children, but would learn from history and set their hope anew on God, obeying his command and avoiding the stubborn, rebellious, and unfaithful like their ancestors were. In Psalm 78, verses 1 through 8, Asaph was setting the stage for a critical history lesson, explaining why it was so vital to pass on these glorious deeds of the Lord. Now Asaph begins that very history lesson, starting with a stark example of the early Israelite failure, followed immediately by a powerful reminder of God's overwhelming, miraculous power during the Exodus and the wilderness journey. This juxtaposition is key: human unfaithfulness contrasted with divine faithfulness. It challenges us to examine our own pattern of forgetting God's past goodness when we are faced with new trials. So let's learn and absorb these hard-learned lessons and awe-inspiring wonders of Israel's early history. We'll first read Psalm 78, verses 9 through 11. Men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned and fled on the day of the battle. They did not keep God's covenant. They refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonderful miracles that he had shown them. Asaph immediately plunges into a painful historical example of Israelite failure. Focusing on a prominent tribe, the men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned and fled on the day of battle. Ephraim was a powerful and a numerous tribe, the descendants of Joseph, and often held a leadership role in the northern kingdom. The bow here was a significant weapon in ancient warfare, implying that they were well equipped and prepared for battle. Yet despite their military readiness, they turned and fled when it counted most, on the day of the battle. This wasn't a strategic retreat, it was a humiliating defection and failure of courage and commitment. This military failure, however, was not simply due to lack of skill or strength. Asaph reveals it's a deeper spiritual root. They did not keep God's covenant. They refused to live by his law. Their military cowardice was a symptom of their spiritual unfaithfulness. The covenant, the Hebrew word berit, was a foundational agreement between God and Israel, establishing their relationship and responsibility. God's law, the Torah, provided the divine instructions for righteous living. Their failures in battle stemmed from their refusal to adhere to these divine principles. Disobedience to God's command and a broken covenant relationship weakened them far more than any enemy army. The ultimate reason for their spiritual decline and subsequent military defeat was their forgetfulness. They forgot what he had done, the wonderful miracles that he had shown them. This is a recurring theme throughout Psalm 78 and indeed throughout all of Israel's history. Despite witnessing incredible demonstrations of God's power, these wonderful miracles, or the Hebrew word pele, those astonishing supernatural acts, they simply forgot. This forgetting wasn't just a lapse of memory, it was a spiritual amnesia, a failure to internalize and remember God's past faithfulness, which would have fueled their trust and obedience in the present. This profound forgetfulness led directly to their covenant breaking and their failure in battle. This serves as a powerful warning. We can be well equipped, prepared, and seemingly strong, but if our hearts are not aligned with God's covenant, if we refuse to live by his commands, and if we forget his past faithfulness, we too can falter and flee when the day of battle arrives. Asaph wants the next generation to see this pattern and avoid it. Now Asaph transitions from this painful example of human failure to a vivid recounting of God's awe-inspiring deeds, the very miracles that Israel forgot. This juxtaposition highlights God's unwavering faithfulness despite Israel's rebellion. Now let's move on to Psalm 78, verses 12 through 16. For he did miracles in the sight of their ancestors in the land of Egypt, in the region of Zoan. For instance, he divided the Red Sea and led them through, making the water stand up like walls. In the daytime he led them with a cloud, and all night with a glowing fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness to give them water, as from a gushing spring. He made streams flow from the rock, making water flow like a river. Having highlighted Israel's failure to remember, Asaph now meticulously details the very acts of God that they forgot. He begins with the outstanding wonders of Egypt. For he did miracles in the sight of their ancestors in the land of Egypt, in the region of Zoan. The miracles were not hidden. They were performed in the sight of their ancestors, publicly, demonstrably, undeniably. Zoan was a prominent city in the Nile Delta, often associated with Pharaoh's residence, underscoring the public nature of God's display of power against Egypt. This sets the stage for the plagues, which were powerful judgment against the Egyptian gods and a clear demonstration of Yahweh's supremacy. Asaph then focuses on the quintessential miracles of the Exodus. For instance, he divided the Red Sea and led them through, making the water stand up like walls. This is a foundational act of redemption for Israel, a moment of unparalleled divine intervention. God's act of dividing the Red Sea was not merely a natural phenomenon. It was a miraculous demonstration of his power over chaos and nature, creating a dry path through an impassable barrier. The imagery of water standing up like walls vividly conveys the supernatural control that God exerted over the mighty waters, ensuring his people's safe passage and the destruction of their pursuers. This was an undeniable proof of God's saving power. God's continuous guidance in the wilderness is then recounted. In the daytime he led them with a cloud, and all night long with a glowing fire. This refers to the pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, taken from Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 and 22. This was God's constant, visible presence among his people, guiding them through the wilderness, providing them shade from the scorching sun, and light and heat in the darkness. It was a tangible, daily reminder of his faithfulness, leadership, and protection, ensuring that they never lost their way, even in the desolate and dangerous environments. Despite the constant guidance, the wilderness remained a challenging place, and yet God met their most fundamental need, which was water. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them water, as from a gushing spring. He made streams flow from the rock, making water flow like a river. This refers to at least two instances where God miraculously provided water from a solid rock, which is found in Exodus 17, verse 6, and Numbers chapter 20, verse 11 at Kadesh. This was not a trickle. It was as from a gushing spring, enough to make streams flow like a river. And this was all done in a parched desert. This was an incredible act of sustenance, highlighting God's power to provide life-giving resources in the most impossible circumstances, ensuring the survival of over 1 million people and their livestock. It was a direct response to their thirst, a profound demonstration of God's care and ability to sustain his people, even in the barren wastelands, as in Psalm 74, verse 7 describes. This section of Psalm 78 serves as a powerful reminder of God's overwhelming power. His constant presence, his miraculous provision for his people, all of this contrasts sharply with the Ephraimites and their failure to remember and obey. So what profound wisdom can we draw from these verses for our Wisdom Trek today? Well, firstly, the story of Ephraim serves as a stark warning. Outward strength, preparedness, and even spiritual gifts mean nothing if we fail to keep God's covenant, refusing to live by his law, and forgetting his past faithfulness. Our spiritual posture dictates our effectiveness more than our natural abilities. Secondly, the psalm powerfully reminds us of God's undeniable interventions in history. When we are tempted to forget, or doubt, or to despair, as Asaph did in Psalm 77, we must intentionally recall God's wonderful miracles, his splitting of the sea, his leading by cloud and fire, his provision of water from rock, and these historical truths are anchors of our present faith. Thirdly, God's faithfulness is magnified in contrast to human unfaithfulness. Even when Israel failed, God consistently provided and led. This underscores his unchanging character and his boundless grace. He does not stop being faithful simply because we forget or rebel. And finally, this psalm, as part of Asaph's teaching for future generation, calls us to remember and tell these stories, not just as interesting historical anecdotes, but as profound lessons to shape our hope in God and to inspire our obedience and prevent us from repeating these mistakes or forgetting God's glorious deeds. Let us commit to remember God's wonders, learning from the past and living in faithful obedience, so that we may not be like those who forgot his mighty acts and stumbled. Thank you for joining me on this profound trek through Psalm 78, verses 9 through 16. I trust that this exploration of remembering God's wonders and learning from our past failures has resonated with your own journey and equipped you to be a more effective teller of God's glorious deeds. Join me again the next time as we continue to seek and apply the timeless truths of God's Word. Until then, keep moving forward, enjoy your journey, and create a great day. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, reminding you to live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and leave a living legacy each day.